This chest is rough. It's definitely in need of a makeover. And I think what I want to do with it is going to be loosely inspired by this Anthropologie fern end table with a faux marble top, a cool toned pastel on the body, not this green though. And I want to swap out the mid-century modern taper legs that are on here for something with more traditional lines. It's got a sloppy faux wood painted finish on it, tons of nicks and dings all over the place. And this one drawer is missing a whole corner, but that's nothing that can't be fixed. First things first, it's gonna get a good scrub down. Furniture is gross. Even if it's been well cared for, it's probably got some sort of furniture polish residue on it that can really interfere with a new finish, whether that be paint or stain from absorbing properly or making a good bond. And there is always dust on the inside. And this time gives me a few minutes to really get up close and personal with every inch so that I can find any hidden issues that might be going on. Oh no. Tell how much of that is filth and how much of it is this finish, but it seems to be washing right off. I'm just spraying each surface down with simple green all-purpose cleaner and then scrubbing things with a microfiber cloth and some hot water. I already know I'm going to be repainting this, and if the finish on here was sound, meaning stuck to the surface well and in good condition, I could definitely just smooth it out and paint right over top. But since this finish is not, I think I might need to go a bit further and completely remove it. I already knew that I was gonna have to rebuild this corner of the drawer, so I'll show you how to do that. But I did not catch this when I picked it up. Not the end of the world, but again, something that needs to be repaired. I'm gonna tuck these legs away in my stash of spare parts because I know I'll be able to use them on something else in the future. Man, look at those brackets. Rusty, dusty, crusty. Those can come off. Let's figure out new legs. These have been in this box for a few years now, but I think they're gonna work perfectly for what I want on here. I'm definitely gonna need to figure out some pieces of scrap wood that I can screw onto the bottom, so I've got a little more room to install the new legs that I wanna use. I just need to find something that's the right size. Right? Right. I think it's a 1/2 inch. Yeah. Okay, so when my husband gets home from work, I'm gonna ask him what he's got for scrap plywood out in the shed, because I'm sure we've got something, and I'll get him to do me a big favor and cut down a piece that will fit in this whole bottom section, which will give me a nice solid base to attach new legs to, and also keep the dust and critters from getting up inside the chest in the future. I am gonna start sanding some of the paint and junk off the sides and insides of the drawers before I worry about gluing anything back together. I decided to take the sander to the drawer fronts while I was at it to figure out what was under this paint, and I kind of expected to find some kind of laminate or maybe a veneer over top of the pine substrate, but quickly found out that these are actually just solid pine, which isn't really very common for this style of furniture. To fix this split side, I filled up a blunt tip syringe with some wood glue just to help me get it in there a little easier. Made sure that there was plenty all the way along the break, and then struggled for a few minutes to get it clamped up straight so that it could dry properly. Was not very demure or cutesy. To go about rebuilding this missing corner, I'm basically just going to mold a new one out of some of this Mohawk epoxy putty. This is a 2-part epoxy that's kind of like Play-Doh and cures up to a nice hard finish. I've used Quickwood's brand of this for years, but I've been finding lately that this Mohawk dries a lot harder and sands a bit nicer than the Quickwood. This stuff comes in a bunch of different colors too, if you're gonna be restaining a piece and want a close color match. But basically you just slice off a little bit from this tube and then knead the 2 colors together until it becomes one solid color. And then you can place it or mold it where you need it. It does start to harden up within a few minutes though, so you only wanna mix up a little bit at a time and make sure that you work quick. I used a paint stick to help me get it kind of straight and in a 90-degree angle, and then I left it to dry. All right, that is ready to sand. My wood glue on this drawer is dry, and Dougie cut me a piece of plywood to screw onto the bottom of the dresser. I carefully sanded the filler and shaped it a little better to blend in with the rest of the drawer, and also used the sander to clean up any excess wood glue on that side that I fixed. Like a glove. I drilled myself 6 countersunk holes around the edges of the plywood and then used some 1-inch construction screws to secure it to the original bottom framing, and just made sure not to put any of these screws in spots that would get in the way of the new leg brackets that I needed to screw on here too. Like I said, since this finish isn't hanging on by much, I can't put a new finish on top of it and expect that to hold on. So this stuff needs to come off. I could sand it off like I did on the drawers, but this latex paint really gums up sandpaper quickly and I'll end up using a ton of it. I could also use a chemical stripper, but that's always time consuming and super messy. So I opted for my carbide scraper just to shave it off. And it took me 12 minutes to get this entire thing stripped down. And I was expecting to find some veneer or laminate under here, but it's all solid pine too. Now that I've got 90% of the paint off, I can go back to my sander to get the rest and smooth things out the best I can. Pine is a really soft wood that marks easily, so it's never gonna be perfect, but I can make it a lot better than it currently is. I've got a few more little spots on the top that need filler, so I'm gonna get those fixed up and then flip this upside down to attach the new legs. These didn't come with their mounting brackets installed, so I'm just gonna mark where the screws need to go, drill some pilot holes for each of them, and then when I put the screws in, they won't split the wood. Same thing to attach these to the chest. I'm gonna mark out where I need my screws, drill some pilot holes, and get them on there. With the glossy white lacquer that's on these, I'm gonna scuff them up with some more medium grit sandpaper to give my primer some texture to grab onto, and then I'll clean up all the sawdust and sanding dust that I've made. Since this is pine and it's got a few knots in it, I'm not gonna mess around with any other primer than my favorite bin shellac-based primer. I use this most of the time anyway, but especially on pine that is notorious for bleeding or leaching those yellow brown wood tannins up through painted finishes, the shellac in this primer is the best way to seal that in. I'm using a cheap microfiber roller from the dollar store to roll on 2 coats of this over every surface. And once it's dry, which should only take about 30 minutes, I can sand it smooth to get rid of any roller texture or lint that's dried in there. I found a few more spots that need a bit more attention, so I'm just going to use a little bit of this spot putty to fill those in, and then I'll be ready for paint. I am going to use my Wagner Flexio electric sprayer today just because I haven't used it for a while and I don't want to forget how. And I'm going to be painting the body and the drawers in this Fusion mineral paint color called Mist. It is the prettiest sort of periwinkle purpley blue, but it's really light. So I think it's going to be pretty on here. I'm going to pour about half of this pint through a paint strainer. Always want to filter your paint when you're spraying because any clog is going to ruin your day. And I'm also going to add probably 2 tablespoons of water just to thin the paint the tiniest bit. I screwed on the nozzle, twisted on the motor, plugged it in. Oh, I also need my respirator. Tested the spray on some cardboard to make sure that the right amount of paint was coming out through the tip, and then sprayed the first coat over everything. This paint needs about 2 hours of dry time in between coats. So when I came back out to do my second coat, I flipped this upside down to let me get all the way around these feet as well. This is all dry, so I'm gonna flip it right way up again. And then I can get started on the faux marble top. And I'm just gonna use a bunch of leftover bits of paint that I have. I'm gonna put a bit of low-tack painter's tape around this lip so I don't make a mess on my fresh paint job. And then I'll brush on a coat of this bright white called Parchment over top of the primer for the base of my marble look. While that white was drying, I dug through all my jars of leftover paint and found a few different gray shades. Little Lamb is a light, cool-toned gray, Oakum is a darker, warm gray, and Ash is almost black. I also grabbed my mister bottle filled with some water, a bunch of brushes, rags, and paper towels because I'm not really sure what I'm gonna wanna use. I poured a few teaspoons of each color into their own separate containers and added some water to thin them out a bit so that they're pretty translucent when I apply them, and it'll take a little bit longer to dry so that I've got a chance to move the color around. Okay, so this is gonna be pretty scary at several points during the process. But the first color I have is Oakum, which is my darker gray. If I had a city sponge, that would be amazing, but I don't. So I'm just gonna use a wadded up piece of plastic here to dip into this watered down paint. And I'm just gonna sporadically get it on over top of the white. The nice thing about trying to recreate a marble or stone is that it's nature, and nature is imperfect and random. Also, if at any point I decide I've messed up and I don't like what I've done, it's just paint and I can go over it and start again. All right, now I've got my mister. I'm just gonna add a little more water to the situation here. And then with a rag, also balled up, we'll just start picking up some of the excess pigment and softening things a little bit. I think I'm gonna spray this down again and try and feather it out even more with my big brush. I should mention too that you do not need to have specialty furniture paints for this part of things. Those little 99-cent acrylic paints from the craft store in a few different gray shades would work just fine for something like this. And now I'm gonna do the same thing with Little Lamb, which is a lighter and cooler toned gray. That's too much. And just keep building layers until it looks right. It can also be helpful if you pull up a reference photo on your phone or laptop of a piece of marble that you like so that you can adjust what you're doing as you go and keep things looking natural. This got a little bit darker than I wanted it to, so I'm gonna add some more white over top the same way, watered down paint, splotching it on with the plastic bag, and then I'll let this layer dry out for a bit. I think I wanna add like 2 veins to this. Do I want to go that way or that way? This way feels right. So maybe like one here and another one in the corner. I dipped this tiny artist brush into my darkest gray and then just loosely rolled it in between my fingers as I dragged it across the top. You can use a feather to get a really nice organic looking vein too, but again, I don't have one. I'm using what I got. I looked at my reference photo to sort of map out a few little offshoots here too, making sure that the veins continued right down over the edge. Missed that. And that bleeding out of the pigment is what I want. So now I've got just a dry paintbrush and I'm gonna start pouncing that up and down and just kind of blending this out. I kept adding more paint and more water and mucking around with it until I liked the way it looked. Just gonna do one more over here. Paint, spray, dab, blend. And once I was liking how the veins were placed, I let them dry completely before coming back for one last layer of my white right over top to soften things even more and give it that depth that real marble has. I want to make these look like they're in the surface instead of on the surface, if that makes sense. I stuck the fan on that to help it dry all the way out. And then later that night, I popped my respirator back on and filled up my sprayer with some matte top coat this time to give the whole piece some protection and finish things off. I ended up doing 2 coats of this with a really light sand and again, about 2 hours of dry time in between. These kind of coppery brass sphere knobs are the best choice out of what I already have in my hardware collection and add just the right amount of bling, I think. Okay, here's a reminder of the mid-century modern looking piece that I picked up from the thrift for $9. And here's what I was able to turn it into. It's a completely different style from what it started off as, but I think now it's perfect to use as an oversized nightstand, extra storage in a kid's room, or even a little hallway table to hide your junk in. Sometimes a girl just needs to smush around some paint. This was a really fun project to work on, and I think it turned out super sweet. Make sure you're subscribed if you like seeing junky old furniture pieces get a new lease on life, and I will catch you all next time.